Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this month's Diversability Unplugged, Disability and Adaptive Sports. Today, we will be diving into the world of adaptive sports, but before we begin, I want to give everyone a little time to join and describe the image that's on your screen. It's a green background with orange, teal, and navy bars at the top and bottom, and it has navy text that reads Diversability Unplugged, Disability and Adaptive Sports, above 4 round headshots with a navy and orange gradient frame from left to right. Vasu Sojitra, he, him, professional skier and adaptive athlete. Jenny Sitchell, she, her, Paralympic silver medalist and operations director at Nickel. Karima Botts, she, her, outdoor enthusiast and paraclimber. And Neil Hughes, he, they, Paralympic snowboarder and adaptive skateboarder. Centered below the words are join our online community or join the Diversability Leadership Collective at https://diversability.mn.co. At the very bottom of the screen is a white Diversability logo and a white Interpreter Now logo. And at the top of the screen is white text that reads, "Please keep microphones muted throughout the event." Now, without further ado, we'll begin. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Marie Dagenet Lewis, and for accessibility reasons, I am a pale-skinned woman with long dark hair, wearing a black shirt with a skull and tropical floral pattern, sitting in the corner of a room. I have the honor of being the operations manager at Diversability, where our entirely disabled team works to ensure that we are elevating disability pride together through community and conversation. Tonight, we are joined by another Powerhouse panel, and let's get right to it. We're going to go to introductions and begin with Vasu. Hi, Vasu.
Hey, how's it going? So my name is Vasu Sojitra. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently actually in a restaurant in Vancouver, just finishing up my tattoo appointment. So just squeezing this in here, funny enough. And yeah, great to be here. I am a professional athlete and a disability access strategist. And I go by the motto of ninja sticking through the woods to bring intersectionality to the outdoors. And I currently reside in Bozeman, Montana, which is the land of the Crow, the Northern Cheyenne, Salish Kootenai, Shoshone Bannock, and Blackfeet nations, confederacies, and tribes, and many others that call that land their home. And yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. And I can't wait to hear more about ninja sticking through the woods. That sounds pretty delightful. Next, we'll go to Karima. Karima, can you please give us a little introduction and a brief visual description too, please, if you can?
Hello, my name is Karima Batts, and I reside in Brooklyn, New York, where I was born and raised, also the lands of the Lenape people, the originators and nurturers of this land. I am a brown-skinned woman with green hazel eyes. I have a mostly shaved head. I wear glasses with a green plaid shirt with ruffles in the front. I'm sitting in a room where I'm surrounded by my plants and a painting of my favorite wood trail in upstate New York. I started paraclimbing, as it is called, in 2010 after losing my left leg below the knee due to a rare form of sarcoma or cancer. And I'm the founder of Adaptive Climbing Group since 2012, has providing accessible access to people of all disabilities and ages in recreational, competition, and outdoor sports, paraclimbing, which is ice, rock, and indoor climbing. I was the first female paraclimber to ever compete in a USA climbing competition. I currently serve on the DEI committee of USA Climbing and a bunch of other DEI committees in outdoor sports. And I also just love being here, and I love Diversability.
Thank you so much. I can't wait also to hear more like You guys make me so excited about adaptive sports. I love it. This is fun already. Next we'll go to Jenny. Jenny, do you mind giving us a brief introduction and a visual description, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jenny Sitchell. I am a pale-skinned female with curly brown hair, although it's braided to one side right now. I'm wearing a red shirt that every now and then you'll see a Team USA thing on it and a patch on one sleeve, and it's polo. And I have blurred out my background because I am currently sitting on my bed and it's a lovely white wall. So I am super excited to be here today. My kind of just intro is that I was in the 2016 Rio Paralympics in rowing. I was the coxswain in the boat, so I'm really good at telling people what to do. And we won a silver medal at the games. And then in Tokyo 2021, I actually was a coach there. And so I coached an adaptive athlete at the Tokyo Games in rowing as well. I'm a 7-time national team member, 5-time silver medalist, international silver medalist. And I now, my day job is I work for the National Council on Independent Living, where I'm the operations director. I'm based in Boston and just love adaptive sport in general, and found a love for it like 2009 or 10. And I identify as a person with a disability, and I'm excited to be here and give you guys a little more info. Thanks.
Thank you. And I love that you gave us a little taste too to our first question, but I'm going to stop myself because we're going to go to Neil next. Hi,
I'm
Neil.
sorry.
Do you mind? Oh, you're fine. I love it. Neil, do you mind giving a brief introduction and a visual description, please?
Hi, this is Neil. Thank you, Marie. I'm a white man, bald, with a gray beard, wearing a green collared shirt, and sitting in front of a bookshelf with a portrait of an indigenous woman on the wall with her hand covering her mouth. I'm in Virginia, out in the country. It's the elected at Monacan Indian Nation, and it's ceded land since the county is called Madison. You can guess who took over this land. It was James Madison's family. I'm part of the original plantation. The plantation house is down the street. We live in a restored 1920s farmhouse. As far as my Paralympic, how I got into adaptive sport, I got a USOC training grant from the 2017 season. And then I practiced with the National Ability Center in Park City, Utah. So we can talk more about that. But I also have had the last 4 years being able to work with families in the city of Charlottesville Parks and Rec. So I'm coming at this more from that perspective about how do we get adaptive sport to families. And this is Neil, I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Neil. It took me a second to unmute. But I'm really excited to hear that too, of how we can make adaptive sport like more accessible to families and children. So that's, I'm really excited. But first we're going to start with really, how did your journey begin with adaptive sports? Everyone has an origin story. And so we'll start with Vasu. If you don't mind giving us your origin story.
Yeah, definitely. So my leg was amputated when I was about 9 months old. So I guess it started pretty early. I was born in the US and then moved to India with my family. Played a lot of cricket and soccer. We like to call it football over there. Seems like everyone else in the world likes to call it football too, other than the US. But played a lot of those two sports. Followed my older brother around, who was 2 years older, and mostly just by his hip. Following him around, trying to be as active as possible with the neighborhood kids. Didn't really know anything about, the category of adaptive sports back then, but moving back into the States to get better access to medical equipment, that was about when I was age of 7 or so. Dove into playing soccer with local kids as well, and then started getting more into skiing and more of the extreme sports. Skateboarding was actually one of the first sports I picked up that categorized as extreme sports. And then I started watching the X Games and shows like Johnny Tsunami and Rocket Power, if anyone has heard of those shows back in the 90s and early 2000s. And then, yeah, just started looking into the Paralympics a little bit more after going skiing for the first time and realizing there's a whole massive world of adaptive parasports out there. And that kind of just like snowball affected into me getting more involved. I used to run an adaptive sports organization for about 7 years prior to being a full-time pro athlete, and taking other individuals out skiing and snowboarding and everything in between. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to it, but that's kind of how it all started for me.
Thank you for sharing, and we'll definitely get more into all of it later. Next, I would love to hand it to Karima, because you started to share a little bit about your story of how you had your leg amputated, but I would love to give you a chance to go a little bit deeper into how you found the love for adaptive sports.
Well, I think what's very interesting for people who are newly disabled, it's a discovery, you know, of your body. So I was in my 20s, you know, when I became an amputee. So I had at least a few years of adult life living before my body changed. So it was a huge adjustment, learning to walk again, learning to do all these things. And so I started to research different sports, you know, online, on the internet, Googling, and found a lot of different great organizations, and Challenge Athletes Foundation. And I did Achilles for a while, which is a triathlon nonprofit that has an office here in New York City. So I took swim classes with them. I went on their walking, biking trips and stuff. But I found climbing through a young adult cancer survivor organization called First Ascents, and it's based in Colorado. And they had full scholarships because I was living in the projects in East New York. So I didn't have the sort of access that even some other people with disabilities have, with like coming from good families and stuff like that. So that full scholarship allowed me to go to Colorado Mountain School for a whole 2 weeks, like to really delve into the sport and fall in love with it. And so when I came back into Brooklyn, I was like, oh my gosh, how do I keep having the same amazing feeling that literally turned me around, because I was like day drinking in my apartment. Like it was really bad. And I wanted to have a different high, which I found in sports. And so I started working at Eastern Mountain Sports, which is now just an online store, but used to be in person. And I started off working there 1 day a week, you know, as long as I could stand on my leg, pretty much, and ended up working for them for 3 years. And then while I was there, I had the idea to start what is now Adaptive Climbing Group.
Thank you for sharing. Like, I love hearing the personal stories, because like each one is like something that can be a guide just to show people this is what I did, and it might spark some ideas. Because truthfully, I never I like, it always dawns on me when someone who wasn't born disabled talks about the discovery, because that's something that really it must be so scary. And so to have that guide of other people's stories to help navigate that discovery is so powerful. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Next, I'll hand it over to Jenny to finish off your origin story.
Yeah, so I gave you a little insight, but basically my origin story in parasport is that I was a coxswain for my college and ended up having an unfortunate event occur with a summer job that I was supposed to have. And so I was like, well, what can I do? And I've always wanted to go to the games and be an Olympian, Paralympian kind of thing. And so I was like, well, you know what? Let's just go apply to some pre-elite clubs. And I ended up getting into a boathouse down in Philadelphia. And while I was down there, I figured, you know, good people row out of this boat club, so I might as well just do as much as I can and give myself as much opportunity as I can. and see where it goes. You know, if anything, I'm getting the experience. I can go try out later or go apply later for national team stuff. And while I was there, I would do like 5 a.m. practice to 7 a.m. with the masters team, then 7 to 9 with the pre-elite, then work all day at the Philadelphia Zoo, and then like 5 to 7 p.m. with the pre-elite. And because I did that extra master session in the morning, I went to a race called Masters Nationals with them. And this was for able-bodied athletes or people without disabilities. And basically, like, I had this woman jump in my boat, an 8-person boat, and she was sitting right in front of me so she could talk to me the entire time. And the coach at the time said, listen to whatever she said. And I was like, okay. So she's talking to me the whole way up the course, and I'm like, okay, like, I get it. Can you stop? Like, I know what I'm doing, that kind of thing. And after the race, she's like, oh, that was pretty good. Can I get your name and number? And 2 weeks later, I got an email from her that was like, hey, I'm the adaptive national team coach, and I want you to come try out. And that was kind of, I went to a couple development camps and made my first national team in 2010. And that was my first sort of soiree into the parasport side of things. And just to give people a little bit of background, I myself don't actually have a Paralympic classifiable disability. So when I went to the games in Rio, I was considered an athlete competition partner versus an actual athlete, which basically meant I didn't get the same like media access that the athletes got. But I have a mental health disability, which I didn't find out till later, but that's another story. So yeah, that's kind of my origin story in parasport. And it's been ups and downs ever since.
I love it. And something I really am taking from your story is that you just never know what opportunity is going to happen. Like something that really was like, okay, can we wrap this up, actually blossomed into something amazing. So I think that that's something that's always good to just keep in mind with everything that we do.
I think it's also, sorry, I want to just throw in, I get really excited about this kind of stuff. Sorry, guys. I think it's about giving yourself opportunity too, because it was about kind of going above and beyond, because I knew that was something I wanted to do and something to strive for. So I opened up doors and was hoping that I could walk through one of them.
That's a really like great point, and thank you for adding to that too. Next, I would love to go to you, Neil, if you don't mind giving us your origin story.
How long do you want the novel?
That's a really good question.
I don't want to bore everyone with my origin from the beginning, but it did start at early age. I have a developmental, it's trauma. It's an interpersonal violence trauma disorder. Just imagine if you were a four-wheel drive vehicle and someone stripped your emotional gears out of your gearbox, and that's kind of what I deal with. So right now I'm having that feeling talking about it, but we can cry during the lunch break. So the problem I have is that before I was paralyzed in 2000 from a roofing accident, I already knew that I had differences and that I was devalued in the culture. And there were only a couple of moments in my life where I felt seen. I went out to the police and told them what happened to me, and it started a huge investigation that didn't go anywhere. So I'm sure people understand how that goes with how the justice system doesn't have justice in it. So at age 15, I was completely vulnerable, and my guidance counselor to pick me up and put me together, put me in yoga. And right now, we have yoga for prison inmates. We have yoga for women who have eating disorders. We have yoga for people who are quadriplegic. We have yoga adaptive anywhere you want it, any way you want it. And I was blessed to have people in my life that saw my trauma and gave me the tools to regulate, except for when I have to talk about it. The path to the Paralympic stage was much shorter. It only took 17 years. And that was with the paralysis and physical therapy. And then my doctor of physical therapy, Whitney Meyer at the University of Utah, said, you're greedy. You want too much out of this idea of getting better. And I said, well, how do I get stronger? How do I make my severed cord work in my right leg? And she says, get a surgery and find a Paralympic sport. So I had ankle surgery to unfreeze the bones in my right leg. My leg is palsied from the surgical accident. And so they took the bones apart so I could put myself in a snowboard boot. And I just started snowboarding as much as possible, because the problem with disability is it takes away your purpose, that sense of self and purpose. Everyone wants to know, what do you do for a living? And by that time, I'd already gone through rehab for the prescription drugs. I'd already gained almost 300 pounds. I was already pre-diabetic and had a thyroid disease and was having trouble with my vision. Like I was already on my decline. And it was a veterans administrator doctor who said, Neil, you've got to stop believing doctors and trust in yourself. And that's my journey, is how do I get myself up every day? I spend hours a day just getting my body to move properly. And it doesn't even look like I'm doing anything, but I'm so burdened by this feeling of something in my body I didn't want there, this hardware that's in my spine. I woke up from surgery with no feeling below my belly button, and every day I'm so grateful for adaptive sport, because I don't just feel my belly button, I also feel what's in my belly, my emotions. It has regulated both my nervous system from my legs and my emotional nervous system. So it doesn't surprise me that Jenny got into adaptive sport and realized, oh shit, I've got trauma. And now I've got 2 disorders. And on top of those, I've got a 3rd disorder. It's called living in an ableist world. I am disabled every day by other people's preconception about what I can do. And I'm so grateful today to be able to talk about that story and hand it off to kids that need a chance much greater than I ever needed. This is Neil and Ben speaking.
Thank you, Neil. And I want to thank you for sharing some of your burden with us today, because all of you, thank you. It's so hard to talk about trauma and all of the microaggressions, all of the things that we've lived through. And it's not lost how hard that is to speak on that. So I have so much respect and so much appreciation for all of you coming together tonight to speak on some of these really hard to relive topics. It's greatly appreciated. And it will be the difference to making sure that the next generation has access to these life-changing, life-saving programs, because it's like, I was someone who was born with a physical disability, and my parents weren't really the athletic type. So I never knew about the world of adaptive sports ever. And so to hear from you guys firsthand how it has saved your life and gave you meaning, and like, it's just so powerful. And it really makes me want this to be I want all the kids to know about this, like all the kids with the bumpy bones and all of the physical disabilities where we think we might not be able to. And so I want to get a little bit deeper now into the world of adaptive sports, though, because I know that with everything like what Neil was starting to touch on, is we live in an ableist society. And so like everything in the world, there is ableism sometimes inherently ingrained into everything. And so I would love to start touching on some of the ableism that you might have experienced in the world of adaptive sports. So Vasu, I would love to start with you, and we'll probably just keep going in this circle so I can make sure everyone gets a chance to speak, but we'll go with you first.
So yeah, definitely, I can definitely share a little bit. I'd say I dabble in between the world of both the adaptive sports world, with running program and just being connected with communities like this, versus also being part of the mainstream non-disabled sports world as well, with being a professional athlete in the ski world, as well as on these major teams in the ski world. So definitely see a lot of ableism there just because of the lack of representation and just people not knowing what to even say, not even knowing that the word disabled is totally fine to say, and making it more shameful to have a disability in the first place. And I know that is definitely something I noticed when I was growing up, is disability was definitely shamed, and it still is in our modern day society, that, you know, impacts our next generation, kids, adults, whoever, on how they represent themselves in our world and how they navigate life. There's definitely a lot of shame put on by other people on how to, you know, view pretty much their mobility in general, whether it's, you know, limited to being a pro athlete or whatever in between. So there is a lot of that that comes with the word disability, and people are definitely very difficult, or have a very difficult time expressing that. One thing I've definitely noticed, especially in the physical disability side of things, is a lot of amputees like to hide their disability to a certain extent, especially when they're not well connected within the disability world or the adaptive sports world or whatever. They either, you know, wear long pant legs or hide their upper residual limb or whatever, for the people that I've run into. And then also have never actually had a close connection with another disabled person, maybe a close connection with someone with a similar disability, but not like in a deeper relationship. So that's something that I've definitely noticed. And I believe from just, you know, being part of this world for a very long time, that it's, again, goes back to that shame of not being identified as disabled and not wanting to be a part of these communities in the first place. But once they realize what we're actually talking about, there's like this sense of, you know, weight being lifted off the individual's shoulder. And that I definitely have noticed that with a lot of different, specifically, again, physical disabilities, that are able to kind of, you know, step outside of that bubble that has been created by society. Hopefully that answers the question. I don't know. I can just ramble about this all the time. So
Oh, I was just about to say that was like so well said, because really that stigma on disability permeates everything in such, like, in all facets. And before, oh, if you unmuted to continue, you can continue.
yeah, no, I wanted to share. I mean, it's just as simple as like disability isn't a bad thing. It's ableism that's a bad thing. Just like every part of our natural landscape, there's going to be imperfections, from the leaves with spots on them to apples that have, you know, little holes in them to whatever. But humans are kind of the same way, where we're built around imperfections. No one's really perfect, and people keep thinking that we can be, but could be a good motivator to get people through the day. But I think, you know, just like nature, humans are imperfect in the most perfect sense.
Well said. And really, it's like the burden has never been disability. The burden has always been ableism on the society. And the more that people will start to change the paradigm to start to feel that way, I believe we will really start to like grow as a society. And before I hand it over to Karima to continue the conversation, I just want to remind everyone we do have Q&A at the end of today. So if you have any questions, you can please put a Q in the beginning of this so we can find it in the chat, and we'll be sure to have some time at the end so we can make sure everyone gets to ask their questions. And now we'll hand it over to Karima to continue the conversation on really the ableism that you've experienced in the adaptive sports world.
I think the most frustrating ableism issue that I've experienced in the last 2 years, there's so much of it. You're like, I can pick one, but I feel like Jenny will pick this one too, because she just told me she's unclassified. And because climbing is currently in the Olympics, was in the last featured Olympics, now they're trying to, in order to stay in the Olympics, they have to have this sport also be a Paralympic sport. So all of a sudden they want to pay attention to us when they weren't paying attention to us. They weren't giving us the access and the things that we needed. But the worst part is all the decision makers are still able-bodied people telling people how disabled they are to compete in the sport. I'm so frustrated. Because part of the thing that I do is I sponsor athletes to compete, right? So I had a athlete team of, let's say, 18 people that I sponsor that are from across the country. And that means I help them access not just on the accessibility as a person with a disability, but also socioeconomic as well, training, whatever is missing for them. And everybody is given it in an equitable way. So let's say there's someone who's a physicist, they don't need that financial help, but maybe someone who's on SSDI does, but everybody will have the exact same access and they train together as a team. Sorry if I'm speaking very fast, I am from New York. So, but I would have to say the most annoying part of this on the competition side is the classification system of the sport, which there is not one person with a disability in the room in that decision-making process. No one with a lived experience of actually doing the sport as a person with a disability. That just, I mean, if we're doing that, we might as well let men lead all the women's empowerment groups and all the white women lead all the, BIPOC initiatives, because that literally would be the same intersectionality of inequality. Okay, let me stop here because I'm about to get hated and maybe even actually cry in public. So,
But that is such a massive point, though, is the underrepresentation. It's not just maddening, it's like downright outrageous, honestly. It just to have people without that lived experience make these assumptions and use their own preconceived biases is so frustrating, and it shows that there's just so much more work that we have to do, and it's tiring that the onus of that work is always on the adaptive athletes. It's always on the disabled people. It's never on the people who are making those decisions, because why not? Like, they're getting what they want from their decisions. Why actually include the disabled? And that is so frustrating. And I would love to hand it over to Jenny next to really just continue this conversation, because I know you have so much to say.
I feel like I always have so much to say, which is either a great thing or a downfall. I'm not sure yet. But just to continue on that vein, I mean, I see it in rowing all the time, and it's really interesting. I know Karima was talking about sort of like classifications, and that kind of thing in adaptive sports. And for Paralympic sports, you do have to classify to figure out sort of what level you're at, what disability level you're at, first off, basically how functional you are or how not functional you are. And first off, like Karima said, there's almost never, I don't want to say never, because I don't know if someone has another disability of some type in a room, but there's almost never someone with a disability classifying. It's always some type of PT, doctor, something like that. At least in rowing, there's a PT and a doctor that classify. And then there's also a technical classifier who basically has been quote unquote trained to be a technical classifier and look at the rowing stroke. There's somebody that know about rowing. And so it's very medical model based sort of classification, which I think is also like, it's so hard because it's like, how do you decide, or do you not decide where someone would fit, where someone would stand, how competition would be equal amongst people? And it's really interesting discussion. But besides that, and I think it's one of those things where, and this sounds horrible, don't like take me the wrong way here, but in Paralympic sport, you want to be the least disabled of the disabled based on your classification in some Paralympic sports. And it's really kind of hard and not easy to palate. And so I think that it's very much, yeah. And like, I think Karima said it perfectly in the chat. All these systems are created by able-bodied sport. It's one of those things. I mean, Paralympic rowing wasn't even a Paralympic sport until 2008. Was the first time it was in the games. And it's like, it's just so mind-boggling to me how there is still so much, just like, I want to say like intrinsic ableism and like internal ableism in parasport. And I also think, I mean, coming from the non-physical disability perspective, the mental health perspective, there's also a bit of like, I don't want to come out about my mental health disability to a lot of people when I was competing because I was afraid that there would be stigma attached. Kind of like, I think it was Vasu or Karima was saying about like hiding the disability. Even with an invisible disability, you don't like, it's that ableism that happens and you want to just hide it and not say anything. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Thank you so much. And real quick, I kind of want to dive a little deeper because we're on topic. So I'm going to get to Neil in just a second, but Tiffany said something in the chat that I was honestly like shocked to see the pay gap for Paralympic athletes. Like when I did a little bit of research, it was like the most watched Rio Paralympics was more watched than the actual Olympics. Yet it's outrageous how underpaid the Paralympic athletes are compared to Olympic athletes. So I would love if you can just dive a little bit into that and the advocacy that the Paralympic athletes had to do to make that right. Because of course, the onus fell on the Paralympic athletes.
So really interestingly, I mean, there's kind of 2 avenues to this. The one is, I mean, Marie, you said that the Rio Games were like some of the most watched games. And what's so interesting about that is there is still no comparison to the Olympics. People in the US couldn't watch my final race in Rio, couldn't watch me win a silver medal because it wasn't being streamed by NBC, so therefore nobody had rights to it. And that got a little better for Tokyo and the last games, but it's still almost a disgrace to Paralympians. And on the other flip side of that, when I was competing in Rio, an Olympian for a silver medal made $15,000 in prize money. And my payout was $3,500. So that's $3,500, where an Olympian made pretty much 4 or 5 times that. And so after, I mean, there has been like talk about changing it. But really after the Rio Games, a lot of the athletes and coaches spoke up, put on campaigns. I know I was part of one campaign that went out. And eventually there was a tipping point with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And as of, I believe it was 2018 retroactively. So it happened in October of 2018. And it was retroactive to the 2018 games, and the medal payout became equal. So for the 2021 games, a rowing athlete that won a silver medal, I believe, got $25,000, and an Olympic athlete got $25,000. So unfortunately, I didn't get to benefit from that, but I'm so happy for all of the athletes that did. And it's just another sort of, I don't know, a huge step to what we have had to do for it.
Seriously, like that is like a historical step that's in the history books. People decades and decades and decades from now, once disability history is finally taught in schools.
It was like, we still got a little ways to go there, Marie, but I get it.
You know, one day people will know about that. Like that is history that was made. And I'm glad that it was finally happened now and not even later than now. Progress over perfection. But thank you again for diving into that experience, because that's so important to amplify, just because no one knows. Like I even worked for NBC during those Rio Olympics. you know, so thank you. Neil, I am so sorry for the delay, but next we will come to you. I would love to hear just your experience with ableism in the world of adaptive sports.
Well, I've had some time to think about that, and a lot of the surface ableism we see in Olympics is also part of the corruptions we're having in the regular Olympics. It's also interesting that the revenue streams are increasing for Paralympics, they're decreasing for regular Olympics. We can thank Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding for some of that, where they were causing disability on screen during the Olympic competitions. So yeah, we're living in an aggressive world. The way I talk about it is the classification system is ableism incarnate. It's being valued or devalued for how visible your disability is for commercial gain. And the trope is tragic to champion, and it's wholesale inspiration porn. And when we talk about internal ableism, so that can happen on several levels, where we can be deluded in the idea that I can rebuild my body and run the triathlons like I used to, or I can climb that wall. Or for me, it was to get back on a skateboard. And I literally was wheeled into surgery after a year of chronic pain and poor responses to injections in my spine. And the surgeon has me sign this paperwork that basically lets him do what he can to relieve my pain and suffering. And I said to the doctor, can I skateboard again? And I'm reminding you that yoga didn't really fix me, it helped me, but it taught me that skateboarding is my best way to stim and to co-regulate. I would calm down on a skateboard. As soon as I broke my back, I was a mess. And I was desperate to get intervention. I needed someone to save me, which is also an ableist trope, which is that the doctor knows better than my own body. He said, no, you'll never skateboard again. I said, well, how about snowboarding? He's like, okay, maybe. And so I literally spent 6 years after that surgery trying to feel my legs, trying to recover from what a doctor said he was doing for me. And it was the Veterans Administration. And this is the main point, is the Veterans Administration started this whole thing. There was a British soldier that started the Paralympics. And now that we have cancer funding, so cancer charities are funneling kids into the Paralympic world, the soldiers aren't winning their gold medals. And so they've got the Warrior Games and the Invictus Games. They're creating more and more Paralympic inspiration for spectators with no lived experience. That's a problem. And then it's self-selecting athletes who don't care if they're disabled, they care about the money. They care about the prestige. They need that validation to be part of the able world. And so I went into the NAC thinking I would find more disabled comrades. To me, Paralympic and adaptive sport is the best way to recognize yourself in others. And I found soldiers who were mad that my friend Noah, who lost his leg to childhood cancer, was faster than them. I found people offering me equipment because they had too much of it. And I was literally riding on thrift store snowboards. I'm on SSDI and Medicaid, and I just want a purpose in life. When I moved up to Camas to get out of Salt Lake City because of my respiratory problems, the pollution was killing me. I drove by the National Disability Center. No one in Boca Rehab ever told me I could pursue a career in adaptive sport as a rec therapist. But as soon as I signed up for the snowboarding team, which I'm not classified for because I'm not missing a limb, right? I would have to have a legal battle to beat Noah in a race. I would have to do a legal battle, and he was automatically in his spot. And so I trained with Noah. I love that guy, and he doesn't understand the years it took me to get there, and why the soldiers are so angry at him. He is so good and such a pure joy to be around, and that is why I wanted to be here tonight, is to say, this program works. Forget the ableism. We took a kid from St. Louis named Noah Elliott and made him a gold medalist. And he has parental custody of his child because he's a gold medalist. Who cares how much money you make on a gold medal? He wanted his kid back. And nobody's gonna trust a skater that didn't finish high school No one's going to trust a person that's never proven themselves other than on the streets. And yes, he's good at selling things on the streets. And now he's selling adaptive sport at Colorado Springs Olympic Training Center to hundreds of children all summer long. The adaptive sports world changes lives and transforms us, whether or not we get on the pedestal. And the pedestal is the problem. You know this from feminists, you know this from other types of marginalization. You don't want to be on the pedestal. You're the first person to go and get knocked off. But if you can use the pedestal to advance your causes and raise your fist and be in solidarity, then hell yes, get paid and make a change in the world. And that's what Noah did. And he still doesn't get it. He's just so fucking amazing that way. Sorry for the language. This is Neil and Ben speaking.
Thank you, Neil, for sharing and reminding once again, though, that like the power of adaptive sports, it trickles down to the grassroots, to where it literally changed lives. It literally gives people their meaning to where they can live the life that they want to live and feel that they're actually living that life. I don't want to cut you off if you have anything to continue, because I see your mic is unmuted. So I just want to give you a chance if you had something else you wanted to say before we move on. Okay, just wanted to make sure. And I really want to kind of steer the conversation in a different direction now and talking about what the future of adaptive sports looks like. I would love to just really hear what it looks like to you, and we'll begin again with Vasu. And so I'm gonna mute my mic now.
So I think Karima's doing this pretty well as well, but my idea of adaptive sports is ideally affinity spaces don't, in the most ideal situation, don't really need to exist. Affinity spaces being spaces that are specific to a specific identity. So disability being the one that we're talking about here, and adaptive sports being that affinity space for people to be able to find mobility. Ideally in the future, these spaces wouldn't need to exist, but because we live in such a violent world where people don't know how to interact with people that are different than them, these spaces are very much safe and brave spaces for people to feel emboldened and feel empowered. So in my work that I'm trying to do, because I do bridge this gap, I feel like I'm always a conduit between the non-disabled and disabled world, being able to navigate very inaccessible spaces like the summit of mountains and backcountry and the boardrooms at North Face and all these things. I'm definitely moving more towards a intentional integration model instead of a separate but equal model, where, you know, adaptive sports are definitely super useful for a lot of people, but I still view that as this like separate but equal model, that we're like segregated, apartheid away from the mainstream sports world, and then more so moving towards an intentional integration model where people from all identity spaces are able to interact with each other safely, bravely, empowering each other in a way that just works for everyone. So that's kind of where I'm moving towards. That's kind of why I also started a business called Inclusive Outdoors Project with another cohort to help bridge the gap between disabled, queer, and BIPOC athletes in the mountain sports world, so we can have that integrated idea and showcase that to the world.
That's awesome. And we'll be sure to find a link to your little project too, because that's just thank you, Tiffany. She was already on it, always on it. So thank you so much, Vasu. And I'd love to hand it to Karima next to continue the conversation on what the future of adaptive sports looks like.
The future of adaptive sports. I don't know, because I feel like we are fighting individual battles in individual sports, and we're at different realms of that, right? So recreationally versus competition wise, which everybody here is either in a sport that is a Paralympic sport or trying to be or going to be or something of that nature, and has that experience in at least either competition or recreation. From the beginning of Adaptive Climbing Group, I was always into integration, because when I started, everybody was like, oh, is this an amputee climbing group? I'm like, no, it's not. Is it we take, you know, kids with who are on, who, you know, identify as being with autism or on the spectrum, or we're taking 79-year-old double leg amputees. Like the integration is, you know, no scale, basically. And so because of that, we operate inside the existing climbing gyms, not off on some side and some sidewall, something different, like right in there with everyone else. And not to say that we weren't tried, like they were trying to give us some off-peak hours. They tried to give us a wall that was specifically for us, and we only climb here. And I was like, nah. So, oh yes, our athletes are hella intersectional. Yeah, we represent literally everything. He, she, they, asexual, white middle-aged physicist to like girl from Iowa to like, you know, like just literally everybody and everything, like, you know, kids from DR, like just everybody. And that's because the way we create our space is intersectional. It's zero tolerance policy, it's welcoming. It's not just accessibility by definition of the government sense of what a disability is, but it's accessibility in all forms of it. So whether you come from socioeconomic or a social indifference, like you are welcome here. And I think that if you were, I'm not trying to like downplay any other adaptive sports organizations or any other paraclimbing organizations, but I can tell you that if you looked at the social and the visuals of those paraclimbing programs and looked at mines, you were like, oh, she looks like she has the United Nations with her. How'd she do that? I didn't like advertise. We have no advertisement money. Matter of fact, everybody in our program is free. Like we don't get paid to run our program. So there's 27 program leaders across the country, and we're all volunteers. I'm a volunteer. I don't get paid to run my own organization. And that's felt. You know, we're very familial and we're very supportive, and we're constantly learning from each other, whether you have a neurodivergency communication thing that we have to learn, or whether your mobility is different, we figure it all out. Some have definitive access to these sort of outdoor sports, and some have never been outdoors ever before, never been camping. And so through all of that, we prepare for all of that as much as we possibly can and as affordable as we possibly can, even when it comes down to getting somebody transportation from New York City to the great outdoors, where in which, you know, people from New York City, especially those from different cultures, don't have access for someone to drive them or can't drive themselves. You know, we think about all those things. And I feel like a lot of para sports do not think about that. Like, I don't know where everybody's from, but like, I wanted to go, for instance, I told Vasu about this. I wanted to go to adaptive ski program, right? When we were in Denver. And I looked it up, and it's like hundreds of dollars for a person with disability to go skiing. I was like, well, whose budget are we on? Because if I had an SSDI check, that ain't gonna be me. You know, like, and it'll be on some weird day, like Thursday at 12, like we don't have jobs or we don't go to school or do anything else. Like we're just sitting there waiting for someone to give me shit to do. We're like, no, like we live. And so these are the sort of things that I totally kept away from, because even though I did not physically become a person with a visual disability until I was in my 20s, I also lived with people with disabilities. I also was related to people with disabilities. And I took those lived experiences and kind of created this to kind of like, this is how I wish I could see the world. And I can't control the world, but I can control like this space right here and make it how I like it. Like our volunteers go through disability etiquette training. I hear this all the time, even from like the parents of kids, of like, I don't know, where'd you get your volunteers from? Where are they from? I was like, child, they're not even allowed to talk to anybody until they get this disability etiquette training right here. Like, like they are not allowed to talk to anybody. And so we're really like adamant about that being the first thing that comes in before I even know how good they are at climbing. Like, and I feel like if everybody kind of put that kind of culture thing first, you know, like, oh, more about the training. Oh, so I do scenario-based training, Jen. So basically, I know this could be seen as some sort of like ableist thing, but this is a permission thing. So if I'm going to teach someone how to climb with someone with a visual disability, I created these scenario-based trainings that now all the paraclimbing programs do. Like for instance, this person's going to be blindfolded. This person is going to climb as if they're visually impaired. And then the person down below who's going to be their caller or their guide has to guide them. So that means they have to put themselves in the place of the climber and be paying attention to whether or not they're in a rest spot or if this is comfortable. And then they will also get to see how uncomfortable it is when your communication sucks. Like, so that kind of like scenario-based training is what we do with the seated harness system for those who are wheelchairs or limited lower mobility. We do the same thing. Now, you don't just have to put it together. You have to be in it and you have to use it and you have to understand it. The trainings are free and open. So it's like once a month regionally, like the Massachusetts team, they have their training. If you look on their calendar, the Chicago team, they have their, monthly in-person training. And then I try to do a virtual training online with just like disability etiquette on and off the climbing wall, virtually on Zoom through our program. I've been crazy this year, but I managed to do one every month this year. So, but that's the kind of like work that I feel that's really important, because even if, these volunteers don't stay with us, they're going to come away with something and they can take it into like their real life, everyday thought process. And even some of the paraclimbers, because people, oh, that's the other thing. People with disabilities need disability etiquette training, like sincerely, like no offense to the born with people with disabilities, but those who are born with their disabilities, I find to be the least with disability etiquette because they're like, I know about this and only this, and that's all I need to know about is this, so I've found that even our program leaders who are people with disabilities need to go through disability etiquette training because they end up offending other people in our program. So that's what I think somebody else wrote in here, something about like people who get chosen to be like the leaders or face of disability when they're trying to be inclusive, but shouldn't be because they literally don't know anything else except their own disability. I saw that rolling in the chat. I couldn't remember that. Yes, offending people with different disabilities. So a good example is I had chosen a Massachusetts leader who was a person with a disability, and they had not seen different types of wheelchair users. And they said something kind of offensive about how they use their wheelchair or how they move around or navigate through space. And clearly that's when I first learned, oh shoot, everybody needs to go through disability etiquette training. So stuff like that. I'm going to end here because I've been talking about.
I think you really bring up a good point though, Karima, because I know from my lived experience when I was younger, I kept comparing pain to my pain because I know pain. I was born in pain. So if someone was like talking about when they were in pain and I thought that really wasn't that painful, I would really like write them off. And once I got older, I really understood that that was my internalized ableism because I only know my pain. I really don't know what other people are experiencing. And it really took me diving into what ableism is and teaching myself that to really learn that that's just one of the forms that internalized ableism shows itself. And I think it's a brilliant idea to have everyone go through disability training and like the disability experience type of stuff, because we only know our one disabled experience. No matter how many diagnoses, I still only know my only one experience. So it makes me really happy to hear that although the future is so far away, it's also right here in these little pockets where people are being the change that they wish to see. So it gives me a lot of hope actually, and I'm really excited about that. I would love to give it to Jenny next to really take us to what she thinks the future of adaptive sports is going.
So just to bounce off Karima really quickly, I think that about that whole sort of isolated, not knowing as a person with a disability, not knowing how to work with or to speak to respectfully other people with different disabilities. So just a quick anecdote, but because I didn't actually know that my mental health disability could be classified as a disability until I was 27, I pretty much for the first half of my rowing career only really knew about physical disabilities and visual impairments. And like knew a little bit about intellectual disabilities and other disabilities, but didn't know about disability world. Like all I saw was the rowing world of parasport and disability. And I didn't get any training in it. I didn't anything like that, like kind of learn as you go sort of thing. And then I kind of branched out a little bit into disability world. And at my previous position with Link 20, it was all of a sudden like, oh my God, this world is open to me with how many different disabilities there are, how different people interpret different disabilities, and how they interpret their own disability. And like that, a lot of times, I mean, I don't feel like I could speak on behalf of anyone really with a disability except for myself at this point, because every disability is so different. And that's also what I love about parasport, though, is there's so many different parasports, that disabilities, whatever your disability, if you do want to do something, if you do want to be athletic, there's most likely a parasport for you, and something that you can do. And so what I see with the future of parasport, kind of speaking to that, is access for people with disabilities. I mean, I think Karima hit on it a little bit, Vasu, you might have hit on it, but just the fact that it is so challenging right now for a lot of athletes to access any type of parasport. And like you were talking about going skiing for one day in the hundreds of dollars. And what I want to see in the future, and I guess it's more what I want to see. I don't know when and if and how it's going to get there, but I'd love to see access. So the same, like integrated access, like if people want to go try out like para snowboarding, they can, just like a person could take a lesson for snowboarding. Or if they want to try out para rowing, like I don't want there to be so many barriers and such a high barrier to entry in so many of these sports. I mean, a lot of these adaptive sports take a ton of equipment, and a ton of specialized equipment. And I think it would be really cool to see, you know, that be not so like rare to come by. And hard to come by. So I think that is what I would want to see in the future of parasport. And do I see it going that way? I hope I do. And if I have anything to say about it, I will. So a little bit shorter than Karima, but that's kind of my view on it.
And I bet you'll have a lot to say about it like throughout your life. And I really hope that it will make that difference. And I want to go to Neil next, and I'm also going to combine the next question because we're getting a little close to time, and I want to make sure we get to our Q&A. So I know the future for you is definitely making sure adaptive sports is accessible to everyone, especially towards children. What advice do you give to people to make that happen? Like how can we make sure that adaptive sport becomes more accessible? What's in our power today?
Thank you. This is Neil. I follow Alice Wong, I have for years, and I love the idea that she could imagine a future and then live in it now. And I think what we've heard today is several people that lived in the future and brought together a vision of what it should look like and then made it happen, especially with the collective climbing group and some of the classification issues. We've found ways to be active and purpose, despite knowing that we'd never get the gold, right? I come from the skate punk culture of the 80s. I don't care about status. And I literally got into Paralympic sport because I ran out of options for increasing my body's needs and strengths. And so, you know who gets the best physical therapy and rub downs before a race? my friend Noah Elliott. He talks to me all the time about his crazy physical therapy. And I live in a world where my spinal cord rehabilitated itself. And so this idea that adaptive sport can change lives and change bodies, I'm already in the future. And that's the basis for what the programming was that I produced as basically a camp counselor, part-time seasonal worker on Medicaid and Social Security disability, burning through my SGAs, which are sustainable gainful employment months. And if you know the rules of this second-class citizen status for disabled people, what I want for the future is someone that has lived experience like me for the last, I don't know, count since 1985, however many years that is. I can't get a certification for rec therapist. The city of Charlottesville can hire me part-time all year long as a seasonal worker. That doesn't make any sense. And on the call today, we have families that I worked with at Charlottesville. I love them. It's already happening for me. I live in the future. Alice Wong calls it being an oracle. I don't create the problem, but I do have to create the adaptive solutions. So for me, Paralympic sport is the only way we can produce that level of visibility for disability pride. We need disabled people to get a gold medal and then raise their fist for disability pride and put up a message about inclusion that includes knowledge of what it is like to live with a disability in a world that will devalue you and dehumanize you. And you know what the biggest problem with having post-traumatic anything is? Depersonalization. And the way that we solve that feeling, which is a dissociative state, is you give someone purpose. And being in a group of disability people, an intersectional group, that exists right now. And if I'm going to take this, I have to read this because I think it's so beautiful. It's from another disabled person. Her name's Chloe Rothschild. She works with Kelly Meyer on interoception, and it's on her blog. But she says, I play baseball for Challenger League. It is my second season. I enjoy it so much. When it doesn't matter, there is no score. What matters is the players are having fun, happy and enjoying themselves. With my vision and autism combined, baseball wouldn't be for me if it wasn't for the league like this. And this just reminds me of Madonna on League of Her Own. Anyway, we can write a movie script together if you guys want. The great sportsmanship on the two adult teams is truly amazing. We don't care which team you're on. You'll hear players from the other team cheering on players on the opposing team. It's pretty amazing. And that just sums up how I feel about any kind of adaptive activity. I hear my friends and teammates cheering me on. I feel happy. Do you hear all the feeling states? This woman is an expert in feeling her body. I cheer them on. I feel equally happy. It makes me wonder why so much emphasis on winning and losing in sports when the fun and accomplishment can really overpower that feeling of losing. I may need someone to tell me when to swing so I can hit the ball. I may not hit the ball on my first, second, or sixth try, not even my seventh with my luck, but then I will hit the ball. There's no giving up. And no, I'm sorry I didn't hit it the first time. Just another example of individuals persevering, being supported, and having fun, while having accommodations and being in the right accepting environment. And she continues, but the last thing she says is, I did it because it was so much joy. And you can reach out to me later, but part of our neuroscience and part of the problem with trauma-informed anything is it ignores joy. And I'd like to just, if we could just change adaptive sport into just adaptive living. And if we could change trauma-informed anything to joy-informed. Because if we don't understand that a basic need in humankind is to have social joy, and where that comes from, that's a basic need. And I see it all the time in my adaptive environments. And that's not just in sport, it's with the vocal training I've done. It's anytime I can connect to a body that desperately wants me not to feel the pain. And so for me, the future and how we can create this is the same thing we see in other social justice movements, is we need to engage the public in a wholesale change in what we use our tax money for. And that money that we're spending on a judicial system that has no justice in it is also the same as the Parks and Rec system that is inaccessible. We're talking about things that we're already paying for. And if you want to do adaptive activities in a city, they're going to charge you for that on top of the taxes you're paying. It's like getting an app and then being charged an in-app purchase to make the app work. And for me, the biggest part of the future would be, instead of being 52-year-olds, I'm a 52-year-old Social Security disability recipient in voc rehab. I've been in voc rehab for over 20 years. And all I want to do is teach people joy through their bodies. And I literally cannot be validated. My lived experience means nothing to a hiring entity unless it's a nonprofit that I start myself. Why is the burden for accessibility on us as athletes? Why isn't there a system in place for this knowledge to be perpetrated throughout the generations, through our social networks that we pay taxes for? I know that the nonprofit system is what keeps things open, the lights on. I'm grateful for the NAC, Challenged Athlete, the Christopher Reeve Foundation. I wouldn't be here without all of that support. I'm not disagreeing that in the current model, yes, but just like our tax code needs an overhaul, Parks and Rec needs to hire rec therapists, and those rec therapists need to have lived experience. And then families like the ones that are on this call can receive these services without fearing whether or not that person that is so good at disability etiquette is going to be there next summer. Will my camp counselor be there for when this kid's a teenager? And right now, I can't guarantee anything about that. But what I can tell you is that I live in the future, that I'm solving problems that I hope in the next 20 years get adopted. And I love the idea of the adaptive life and joy informed. And I think we need a shift in our language, and we need it to be a complete shift. And here's the thing that I've been thinking about most about talking tonight is we understand, because of Black Lives Matters, that Black people and colorized, racialized groups, they don't have a problem with being Black or Asian or Pacific Islander. They have a problem with racism. As a disabled American, a second-class citizen, my assets are being checked every 6 months by Medicaid. I don't have the same rights as a regular American. So I don't have a problem with my disability. I am surviving ableism, just like people who are racialized are surviving racism. And in order for us to get a hold on that level of energy that can create a true ADA accessibility, we need to use our tax dollars to create opportunities for adaptive activities. And this information is in our lived experience. It needs to be validated. That's my soapbox. I'm Neil, and hopefully I'm done talking.
We still have like 18 minutes. You're not done talking yet. We have so much to hear from you still. But thank you, Neil, because all of that was very powerful, and the lived experience should really be in all levels of everything. And that would be the way to make it more accessible, because the lived experience, we know how to connect with people better. We understand that these classes shouldn't be hundreds of dollars, because that's not financially accessible to many of the people who would benefit from those classes. And it's just the little things like that, where the ableist society finds value in profiting off of us, versus someone with lived experience finds value in actually making sure that person, it feels like they're supported, and it feels the good positive effects of being in that community, being in that space. So I really appreciate you stressing all of that. And like I said, we have about 15 minutes left. So Jen had a really good question in the chat that I don't know who was going to answer this one, but it was, what would it take to take over the classification system? Like, isn't that system created by able-bodied people? What do you, in your opinion, do you think it would take for that to be changed? I see Karima, you reacted. I would love to hand it to you.
I don't know. I think either me or Jenny can answer this honestly, and Jenny should chime in at any point.
Jenny, awesome.
But obviously, I think Jenny said it before, that we need to have more of us in the room and in the conversation around the rules and the validity of some of the rules that they're making. So what's happening for me, because we're earlier on in our classification adopted into what would be Paralympics. So a lot of climbers got pushed out of the sport because they weren't on a list of diagnosis, which, by the way, has a broader range. Just like there's 120 types of cerebral palsy, you know, they're saying, oh, well, we're only measuring range of power, we're not measuring pain, or how it correlates to the fact that you could be atrophied through constant pain if you have CPRSD and you haven't stood for 13 years and you only use a wheelchair. Well, we only can measure one of those. And I'm like, what? Like, they don't take the whole person into account. Like, it drives me insane. So that is the problem. You have no one with lived experience. The classification also system is so not whole. You know what I mean? Like, Jenny, go on. Can you finish answering this?
Yeah, I can pick up on that. But I think that, I mean, I don't think that the classification system is whole in any of the category, in any of the sports. I also think that, from what I've seen in rowing, is it's very much, I think that, you know, if, like, first off, we have to quote unquote infiltrate the classification room. But I also think that we need to, or the people that are doing the classifying, the people that are making the rules, although they may not be disabled, they need to start listening to the athletes, listening to the athletes' coaches about that, because I think that there's just like, they're the ones that are living and rowing and putting on the show for everybody. And they should be able to have some say in, you know, if they think, well, how do you like think that she became that classification? Like, that doesn't quite make sense. Or something like that. Like, I think it's this one, for rowing, it's this one instance in a day, and you go in and they do a PT scan on all of your limbs, and then they do a scan while you row for 10 minutes. And based on that, you're classified. They don't see you in a race. They don't do anything of that. You can protest people's classifications, but they very rarely listen. And so I think that, you know, both infiltrating the room, but also just getting people to listen and have a say, and explaining that, and getting people more open to listening to disabled athletes, I think is going to be huge.
Well, that's different for us because we do have the examination room, which is such a like violation, like, of the body when they have to do that. Like, they have to, for instance, impose for, let's say, someone with CP to have a spasm to measure, you know, the spasticity of the muscle, and things like that for movement. You know, try to induce a spasm, things like that.
My God.
So that's why we're allowed to have a person in the room, and I had to be there with all my athletes, as you know, for comfort and often for anger during examinations. And then the other thing I want to say to you is that I have been in a room, seen someone get a classification, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's wrong. And the thing is, when they do qualifications rounds, that means they get to see the people who classify them get to see them, and they can actually change their classification during qualification round, right? Because they couldn't get that in the examination room. And every time that I'm like, that person was classified wrong, they do change it to the classification that I guessed it was going to be. And sometimes I wasn't even in an examination. I don't even know their diagnosis. I literally would just watch them ambulate across the room and be like, that person's going to be in RP1 or something like that, or or B2. And then they'd be like, they put them in a wrong classification, these able-bodied folk. And then they watch them climb, and sure enough, they're put in the classification I thought they were going to be. And all I have is an AS degree in recreational therapy. So somehow having a doctorate in PT means absolutely nothing. So whether you're able-bodied or not, I think. So it's just like, all of that needs to be taken into account. As far as Jen's question, as well as what they're talking about trans in sports, because I actually just sat in a DI committee meeting with trans in sports. And I think what's very interesting that's taking place in all the sports is now that there are DEI committees that includes para athletes, as well as those. So in USA Climbing, the chair of our DEI committee is a trans athlete, and one of my para climbing coaches actually for my training camp. And I'm not the only person with a disability on the DEI committee. It's someone who identifies as they, and also just recently got declassified last year from the new system, but is also a person with a disability that would be seemed invisible because you can't see the insides of the body parts. And so that diversity is taking place now more than it used to be. So I can say that we are headed in the right direction, but we still have like a long way to go.
Thank you so much for just like such a awesome like conversation. I really wish that we weren't wrapping up because we have less than 10 minutes left, because I feel like we can really dive. Where does the time go? Like, I feel like we can really dive into this even more, but I want to make sure we have time to celebrate each one of you and support anything that you are working on. Vasu, you put a little plug in before about one of your projects, but I would love if you can just speak about it again, tell us how we can support you, and just let us know where we can follow you too.
Yeah, definitely. So it's called Inclusive Outdoors Project. And the idea, again, is to create a very intersectional space with the motto of the space is made with you in mind. So the idea, again, is various different communities, queer, disabled, BIPOC, folks of size, you name it, all typically all of our program on sliding scale opportunities, because affordability, as Karima knows, is one of the biggest financial barriers, and many of us adaptive athletes and disabled folks know money is hard to come by sometimes. So that's definitely our focus. That's the population we focus on. But the sports we take part in involve rock climbing, mountaineering, ice climbing, and backcountry skiing. And now we definitely are starting to partner more with trail running festivals and events. So a combination of a lot of different sports, specifically that take on part on primarily public land, so federal land, stolen land, indigenous land, that we try to make sure that it's again made for all of us in mind. Hopefully that answers everything. Is there another part of that question that I might have missed?
Where can we follow you on social media?
Yeah, most of our advocacy is done on social. It is kind of a passion project of mine, and based on how full my plate is, as Tiffany might know, and Karima, it's usually intermittent communication, but we try our best to follow up and post and share events that we're partnering with. The biggest thing I really would love to create is more of a inclusive backcountry ski festival, specifically trying to focus on adaptive backcountry skiing, just because that's kind of what I'm known for. And I know, talking to a lot of Paralympians, they're trying, it seems like, especially in the snow sports world, there's definitely a little burnt out about competition, especially in that realm, and wanting to move more into the backcountry and just find that joy through the mountains again.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I'm really excited to see what comes out of all of your projects and to keep up with everything, to see how we can support you too throughout that journey. I would love to hand it over to Karima next. How can we celebrate you? Is there anything that you are working on that we can support you? And I saw you put your social in the chat, but if you can also just say it verbally too, just for people listening, that would be great.
Yeah, so our adaptive climbing group's Instagram, you can look us up, Adaptive Climbing Group, because we're the adaptive climbing group. We're the first ones. So everybody's like, oh, are you the Portland one? Are you this one? And I'm like, no, we're just the adaptive climbing group. But on Instagram, it's adapt, ADAPT, and then climb, CLIMB, and then group GROUP. That's how you find us on Instagram, Adapt Climb Group. And yeah, Tiff's got a shirt. Our logo is the words adaptive climbing group surrounded by 2 adaptive equipments, which is an ice axe and a crutch, which axe is the first adaptive climbing equipment because you can't use your hands. So that is our logo. We have national programming. We have a national athlete team that competes. Our local weekly chapters run between Northern New York, about 2 hours from Toronto, all the way down to the city. We have Massachusetts, and then we have the Chicago area, but we have outdoor trips that are regional. For instance, we had a trip in Maine in Acadia National Park last month, and then we're upstate this month, and I think we're in Wisconsin at Friendship Park is the next outdoor trip for the Midwest for rock. And then there's an adaptive climbing festival. I didn't run it, but one of my youth program leaders from years ago who's come up as an awesome ally working with other para climbers created an adaptive climbing festival that is taking place in Kentucky in October. You should check it out. It's very accessible by price as well as ability. And all the clinic leaders are people with disabilities. Everybody was teaching the climbing and doing everything. There's some for visually impaired, there's some for, rollers, walkers, everybody. So definitely should check that out. I really highly suggest no one follow my personal Instagram. It's mostly clothes, hip hop music, plants, food, and memes. So like, you will not find anything informational or educational in any of that. Maybe a couple of reposts, but I like to keep my personal Instagram as personal as I possibly can make it, and leave all the education to the people who are in my program across the country.
Understandable. When you're talking about your personal Instagram, honestly, you were threatening us with a good time. That sounds we are a little short on time, so I'm gonna hand it right over to Jenny. How can we celebrate you? Where can we support you?
Yeah, so I think the main thing, I work for National Council on Independent Living. If anybody wants info on that, not really para sports related, but I'm happy to give you info on that, introduce you to people, that kind of stuff. And I think that the main thing is, for me, I don't really have a side a nonprofit or a program that I run, anything like that. Oh my gosh, I just totally lost my track. Dang it. But you can support me. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook. I am the worst millennial ever. I never update it. And I'm probably the least followed verified Instagram person. I think I have 400 followers and I'm verified. So I'm pretty cool like that. But yeah, it's a good time. I post maybe once a year.
You kick me out so much every time you say least followed verified person. Thank you so much. And again, if we have those links in the chat for anyone who wants to follow. Next, we will go to Neil. We have just a few minutes left. So where can we follow you and support you? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
All right, so I wrote a little thing out. I'm supported by Owen, Bree, and help with Emily and Henry, and sometimes Michael. Also, Matt Dawson and Asher with his sisters. They're on the call today, and my family that's here. And I want to mostly know who's supporting you. Everyone that's listening and everyone that hears this recorded message, who is supporting you in your adaptive life? How are we breaking these boundaries to make what could kill us the best thing in our lives? Let's get rid of that tragedy, disabled trope, the stereotype, and let's live a full life. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you. That's a really powerful message to end on. And before we really close, I do have one quick shout out that I want to give for Jen Fry, because she has shared a Comcast opportunity with Comcast Universal and Together International for an accelerator program that's focused on BIPOC founders with disabilities that are in the early stage startups. And so this is an accelerated program for 10 to 15 disabled founders, and it's a virtual one as well. And so we are close on time. So I'm going to post more information about that in our Facebook community and in our DLC, the Diversability Leadership Collective. So if you know anyone that would be interested in that, it is for BIPOC founders. I really hope that that would be a great opportunity for them. And thank you everyone for coming tonight, for sharing your stories. And I really appreciate you spending the time with us tonight. That is it for everything. So we'll catch up with everybody in our communities. Have a great night and thank you for being here. Bye-bye.